the idea that Sir Patrick Vallance and Chris Whitty didn't know that that figure was nonsense and let the Prime Minister give that figure as a justification for locking down our economy and our lives is unforgivable. And I would go so far as saying borderline criminal. And I think when the public inquiry delves into this, that is going to be one of the key moments.
Hello and welcome to Recent UK with me, Darren Grimes. Please do consider hitting that little subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss out on any future content, because boy, oh boy, have we had some cracking content this week. And today's show, of course, is no exception. I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by someone I'm delighted to be able to call a friend. She's a journalist, a broadcaster, an after-dinner speaker and awards host whose fantastically successful talk radio breakfast show has proven how influential the airwaves and speech radio can be in shifting the dial and provoking debate. Now, this morning's show was absolutely no exception. So let's talk about that. Hello, Julia.
Hello, lovely to speak to you. Absolutely a friend, and always.
Absolutely. I mean, come on, that show this morning was amazing. Cracking viewing.
Well, that's it. We are live streaming on YouTube the entire time now, and I have to brush my hair in the morning. I can't wear my PJs. I'm dressed like the Queen now, which you can see.
Very regal.
Well, most days we get a cabinet minister on. Probably won't have one for a couple of weeks now. But Robert Jenrick, the Housing Secretary, was on this morning, and I asked him the question I would have asked any cabinet minister who was doing the media round today, instead of is furlough going to be extended to Scotland, and all the little rinky-dink things that all the other media are asking about in terms of how we're going to do the lockdown. I still want to know why we're doing the lockdown and what the justification is for it. So I asked him quite simply, has the government done an impact assessment on the costs of a lockdown? I mean, we are talking about a major policy that is going to cost the country tens of billions of pounds. It's going to cost probably millions of people, ultimately, their jobs, maybe not in the next month, but ultimately those jobs will be gone. It's going to cost tens of thousands of businesses, people's businesses they've built up all their lives. People are going to lose their homes, marriages are going to break down, children are going to have their schooling disrupted eventually. This is what happens when all these things start. And I asked if they'd done an impact assessment on the simply the costs and the benefits of having a lockdown or not having a lockdown. And after 4 attempts, we eventually managed to work out that the answer was no. And I find that just extraordinary. And all of the media who have been obsessed with what on earth could happen if we, go for Brexit with a no deal, or even Brexit with a deal, and we're going to have lorry parks in Kent. What are we going to do? The entire country is going to be over. It's the end of Britain as we know it. Seem to be completely and utterly unbothered by the prospect of millions of people losing their livelihoods. And I find that astonishing.
Absolutely. I mean, Julia, can we start by sort of discussing, as someone who's made clear that you supported the first lockdown, in order for the NHS, you've said that you wanted the NHS. You were, yeah, absolutely. To build up its capacity for a virus that, let's not forget, we knew precious little about at the time. And you've rejected the mad conspiracy theories that occupy some corners of the internet. But now, Julia, you have actually changed your mind. I wonder if you could take us through that journey.
Oh, it's been a long journey, I have to say. I've been a political journalist for many, many years, and I have learned very much that the thick of it is a far more accurate portrayal of what's going on in politics than anything else. It's usually ineptitude, incompetence, or back covering that's going on when governments do things wrong. So whenever there were errors in the early days, I have to say I gave the government the benefit of the doubt. Again, pretty new government, unprecedented virus threat. From what we'd seen in Wuhan and northern Italy, a very, very deadly virus, far more deadly than flu. We didn't know how to treat it. We had body bags everywhere, mass graves in China and in Italy and elsewhere. It was absolutely terrifying. I myself caught the virus mid-March. So by the time we went into lockdown, I was already at home with the virus myself. I wasn't ever ill enough to need to go to hospital, but I was certainly unwell for three weeks, really knocked me for 6. And I thought the government was doing what they needed to do to buy some time, and keep people safe, and absolutely supported that. And then as the weeks went on, and there were all these issues of, why were we unable to get PPE? Why were we unable to build up our resources enough? And then why were we not seeing the death rates that we were supposed to be seeing? When we peaked in deaths 2 weeks after we'd gone into lockdown, it suggested that actually it wasn't the lockdown that was doing it. And then looking at what's happening in Sweden and elsewhere, as the months and months have gone on, it became clear to me that the evidence for a lockdown was not there. And that doesn't mean that they did the wrong thing going into lockdown the first time round, because they didn't know where they were with the virus. But that does mean that going into a lockdown a second time is very questionable, when the evidence is really clear that lockdowns don't just save some lives. Of course they do in the immediate start of the lockdown, but they lose a lot of other lives. They cost other lives in the long run. But also, as we now know, they to all those purposes simply delay the loss of life. Yeah. And the lives we're losing to coronavirus, as tragic as they are, and I've got parents in their 70s. I've got an elderly aunt in a care home right now, and I'm always been very worried about her. Fundamentally, we are talking about people who are near the end of their lives, people in their 80s, most of them very, very unwell already. And we are throwing away the lives and the livelihoods of tens and tens of millions of healthy people of working age and children for keeping, sadly, not very many people alive for a few months longer. And I'm sorry, I don't think that's the responsible thing for a government to do.
Mm-hmm. Now, Julia, you've wrote in the past, and I in no way, I should make that absolutely clear, mean to provoke or upset you or remind you of painful things. But I wonder how influential the stories of pregnant women going through vital scans on their own, only to discover that their pregnancy has ended, having to face miscarriage without a loving and caring hand to hold, has actually shifted the dial for you. Those very personal stories. Yeah. I'll never, ever forget, and I mean this with every fibre of my being, despite the fact I was very young at the time, the anguish that hit my mother, Julia, when she lost a child. How much are we forgetting our decency in pursuit of defeating this virus?
Yeah, just to explain all this, this is the campaign in which the MPs like Alicia Kearns, who've been campaigning on this, have just won at the weekend to allow the partners of pregnant women to attend 12-week scan, the 20-week scan, to attend with them when they are perhaps going through miscarriage, or even through the whole of labour. We've had men who've missed the birth of their children, men who've not been able to be there at their partner's side, holding their hand at the point, for many, many hours of birth, and at the point when they discover their baby has been lost, and all because apparently it's unsafe. It's apparently only unsafe in some NHS trusts. It's not unsafe in most other NHS trusts, and it's not unsafe in private hospitals, apparently. But I find this extraordinary. I think it's outrageous. And one of the reasons I feel that so strongly is I myself lost 4 babies, and 2 of them I found out at the 12-week scan that we had lost the baby and there was no heartbeat. And my husband was with me by my side, and they were his babies too. And the thought of doing that alone fills me with absolute horror. And on 3 occasions I have had to have miscarriage operations, which is to all intents and purposes like having an abortion. And the thought of sitting in a hospital ward on my own, going through that, with knowing that my baby had died inside, I think that's torture. I think if you looked at a UN rules, that would be torturing somebody. And I also had a 74-hour labour with my healthy baby, who I did have. 74 hours. I think my husband would quite have enjoyed being out of the ward for a couple of those hours, but I couldn't have done that alone. And I do worry that this whole protect the NHS argument we're constantly hearing, we are forgetting the NHS is there for us. It's not our job to protect the NHS. It's their job to look after us. And I really think that the people in charge of NHS trusts, whether the chief executives, the consultants, whoever, who are dealing with individual wards, they need to remember who's paying their wages and why they are there. And the heartlessness of that policy, I think, is unforgivable.
Absolutely. Julia, the British people, supposedly a freedom-loving nation, we voted to... I remember in our last conversation, we were talking about Brexit. Who would have thought that would have been viewed upon? Absolutely. The halcyon days of conversation. But we voted to leave, and because this nation said, right, I don't want to be a federalist pussycat, but instead a British lion, right? And we've seemed to have accepted with gusto, I might add, no longer being able to have a meal with your extended family or your friends, being banned from buying clothing or books from supermarkets, or celebrating a child's birthday with a party. And even, Julia, that Christmas might be cancelled. What do you think's happened to us?
God, if I could understand that. I mean, $64,000 question or what? I'm blown away by that. I think what's happening now is very, very different from what happened with the first lockdown. After all those years of the division over Brexit and the division in the general election and the culture wars and all of that, which we've discussed many times before, I thought the one good thing we can get out of the horror of the first wave of the coronavirus was that we could come together as a nation. And we've got a real problem to deal with. Let's deal with the real problem and all stick together. And I felt very emotional about how the country was coming together, and this idea that you would sacrifice things to help other people. And when Rishi Sunak announced the furlough scheme, and that the arms around the nation, that's hands around our necks rather differently, but arms around the nation, that we would all be in it together. I mean, okay, it's not everyone covered. We're not all in it together. Some people have done very well. Some people are still really struggling, but there was some notion of us coming together as a country. And that, we were giving up freedoms, but although it was a legal issue, I felt it was voluntary. I did feel that people were doing it because it was the right thing. This time round, though, there seems to be a real feeling of stop them from doing what they're doing. They're to blame. I blame the young people for going and daring to have a drink or going off on a hot date. I blame people who were in a restaurant, people who were going to a gym, people who are going to work. How dare they go on public transport? Everybody in favour of this lockdown seems to think that what everyone else is doing is terrible and what they're doing is just right. An awful lot of people very happy to curtail the freedoms of others. Well, I don't go to the pub. What do I care if the pub's closed? Look, Darren, I get up for work at 4:40. It's not often I'm actually in the pub at 10 p.m, but I would still like my fellow citizens to be allowed to be in the pub at 10 p.m, or indeed at any time past 10 p.m. on Wednesday when we're not allowed to be in them at all. I think it's really strange. I think the feeling is completely different. And I think the justification for it is really different. And I don't understand why there are so many people who claim to want freedom, who claim to live in a free country, to claim to think that they want accountable government, who are quite happy to sign away their and their fellow citizens' freedoms on a whim, because it's not on the facts. They are willing to listen to the Prime Minister. I mean, bearing in mind, the support for the lockdown is actually much higher on the left and much higher among Remain voters. They've broken down the polling, and which I find fascinating. These are people who think that Boris Johnson is a complete and utter charlatan. They despise and loathe this man. They think he's a liar and a fake and everything. But when he is standing side by side with Chris Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance, then suddenly he's the second coming, he's the Messiah. And then they accept that, yes, we have to give up all these freedoms to save lives. There has not been an adequate justification or explanation about why having a lockdown again will save any more lives in the long run, and why it won't cost other lives and the economy. And I'm flabbergasted that so many millions of people, 70% plus of the public, say, whether they really believe it, I don't know, say they support it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, don't remind me about getting up early, by the way. I've just remembered I'm doing your show in the morning. So I'm actually going out to the Free Speech Union fundraising thing at Comedy Unleashed. So I'll have to be on my best behaviour. But putting that to one side, I've just watched Politics Live before we did this interview. And the statistician, David Spiegelhalter, I believe, isn't it? Yeah. He, have you had him on the show?
No, we had a few Twitter exchanges there, yeah.
He was discussing the government COVID projections graphic of up to 4,000 deaths a day. He reckons that it should never, Julia, have made or been shown, and potentially it was only done to provoke scary headlines.
Absolutely.
I'm wondering to what extent we're actually damaging faith in the science and the experts by jumping on what are essentially project fear scenarios and very, very worst case scenarios that then don't materialise, will actually put trust in experts at risk.
Yeah, forget Michael Gove, and again, it wasn't a false sentence, was it? People don't trust experts, don't want to hear from experts anymore. Economists, with all due respect, and as someone who's got an economics degree, are not experts in the same way that epidemiologists and doctors are, and scientists who use proper data and can actually looking at real, proper facts in terms of disease.
Instead of fortune telling.
I'm actually horrified by this breach of trust that we saw, and it's not the first time. I had absolute faith in Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance throughout the first wave, and my view was if they said they're eminently qualified in their field. I'm genuinely shocked. I think it is unforgivable what they did. They are far too clever. I mean, far, far, far too clever and eminent in their fields not to know that the example scenarios they keep randomly choosing and happening to mention and giving to the Prime Minister, this 4,000 a day death, are to think they're accurate. They know they're not accurate. That claim came from a computer model from a report that was 3 weeks old. And that computer model has been updated. It was updated on the 28th of October. So long before Saturday, plenty of time for that data to be given to the Prime Minister to use. And that data had already been proven to be out of date and wrong, because it predicted that by the weekend, so by the day the Prime Minister said we would have 4,000 deaths a day if we didn't lock down in December, we were supposed to have already had 1,000 a day. Actually, it's around the 250 mark. Okay, 250 too many, you may say, but nowhere near the projection he was talking about. And yes, those deaths do matter, the difference in deaths, because that's the difference between exponential growth out of control that would just overwhelm the NHS and a growth that we can completely easily handle and deal with. And also, it just shows that virtually every computer model that we have had so far is, frankly, I mean, I'm trying to think of a technical term, but I think the best way of describing it is a load of bollocks. They're simply wrong. And we go back to Neil Ferguson from Imperial College and his computer models. All wrong. I mean, so unbelievably stupidly wrong, using worst case scenarios of 500,000 deaths if we did nothing. When that 500,000 death scenario was if we carried on being completely normal, so no one washing their hands more and everyone still, mixing just as they had done beforehand, before we knew about the virus at all. Well, that was nonsense. I mean, that was never going to happen. The 4,000 a day prediction would be higher than the highest peak we had in Brazil, highest peak we had in India during the first wave, countries which totally failed lockdowns. The idea that Sir Patrick Vallance and Chris Whitty didn't know that figure was nonsense and let the Prime Minister give that figure as a justification for locking down our economy and our lives is unforgivable. And I would go so far as saying borderline criminal. And I think when the public inquiry delves into this, that is going to be one of the key moments.
Mm-hmm. I mean, another thing that really gets me is the fact that, this was a government, let's not forget, less than 12 months ago, was elected with an 80-seat majority and on an agenda of levelling up the country. And if you look at the likes of Liverpool and County Durham, they have started to reverse the trend. Their case, it's going down. I think Liverpool's even halved its number of cases. And you just think about some of the most deprived areas in the whole of the United Kingdom. And there is, I think of my two brothers in County Durham, for example, both unemployed, both casualties of the COVID economic response, both facing, let's be honest, pretty dire prospects and a debt burden that they will have to carry with them for the rest of their working lives. Let's be absolutely clear about that. And I just think, Julia, what the hell? I campaigned for them. I knocked on doors. But I don't think it's verbose to say that actually they have betrayed those that they promised that they would level up.
Oh, look, I can understand. In any crisis, the sharp-elbowed middle classes and the rich end up doing better than the poor. Even if they got whacked with a load of tax and lost some of the value of their homes and their shareholdings, they'll still already they'll be all right, because they've got. The whole point of being, middle class and well off is that you've got that that safety net, haven't you, underneath you, which means that when there is a crisis, you can financially cope with it. And this is, I think, one of the things that a lot of the people who are supporting lockdowns, and a lot of the media particularly calling for it, live in very, we talked about this, everyone, for so many months now, they live in very nice homes, they've got gardens, they've got pretty safe jobs. Public sector people, well, they're still on full pay, no furlough for them. And people are just sort of working from home and all quite enjoying it. It's not been so bad, has it? It's sort of a lovely time in the park teaching my kid how to ride their bike when they were off school. I mean, I think a lot of people have had quite a pleasant experience in the first lockdown. They've got a bit bored after a bit, but I think this second lockdown is going to be very different because the job losses are going to come now. A lot of these businesses that clung on in the first few weeks and the first few months of that lockdown were able to adapt. The pubs that started doing takeaway meals and serving as off licenses, and everyone doing stuff online, and the adaptability and the entrepreneurship we've seen from small business has been off the scale. I've never been prouder of our country because of that, but they are holding on. Even Eat Out to Help Out didn't help that much. Retail struggling, empty shops. They are simply not going to get through this year. They will be not holding out for the Christmas shopping and the Christmas parties and people enjoying some semblance of a normal life before Christmas. That's not going to happen. Even if we come out of lockdown on the 2nd of December, people are not going to be going back to the bars and restaurants, even if they're open. And that is the point where we're going to start losing jobs. We're going to be in a lockdown where you can't be in your garden and you don't want to go walk in the wind and the rain in the local park, and you're stuck in the house, and you're working from home, and you've got the heating bill mounting up. You're all getting on top of each other. Frankly, probably like me, they've sorted out all their cupboards and shelves. There isn't any more to do. And I think it's going to start getting very miserable. And I think when the figures start coming in about the job losses and the business closures, I think that's going to focus minds a little bit more. But I do worry there's a whole part of this nation, the well-off and middle classes and the public sector, who think that they are totally immune to this. And I think they're going to have a real shock coming.
I mean, that's one example, isn't it? I remember going out to buy takeaway pints during the first lockdown.
I've seen a lot of the pictures.
Yeah, and you can't do that anymore, Juliet. That's one evidence of in the second lockdown, you won't actually be able to buy takeaway alcohol. I don't know what the evidence is behind that.
You can go to Sainsbury's to buy it. You go to Tesco
exactly.
Express, but you can't buy it from a pub and keep your local pub going. I mean, what on earth is the reason for that?
And there's no evidence to suggest that in any way would lead to a spread of the virus. Not that I've seen anyway. I just think a lot of this, that's what gets me the most. If they could actually say, listen, Darren, you absolute gobshite, here is the evidence that shows why that is a bad thing, I would hold my hands up and say, well, listen, esteemed epidemiologist, you know better than I do. But I'm afraid they're not doing that.
There's so little evidence. It's like going out to restaurants. Oh, if you've been out, I get tweets from people saying, well, you've been out to play out, you've been on aeroplanes and you've been out to restaurants. You're responsible. I'm basically killing grandmothers all over the country. I mean, it's such a little nonsense. When I've gone out to restaurants, and I've not gone out that much, again, I get up early. I don't have that much energy. But, you go out, you're wearing a mask walking through. You're not touching anyone. You're not speaking to anyone on another table. You're a couple of meters away. I'm closer to people on the train on the way home from work in the morning. I'm not speaking to anyone but the waiter who's standing far back with a mask on. We've all washed our hands God knows how many times. It is absurd to think that this is how it's being spread. We all know how the virus is being spread. It's being spread in people's homes. It's people being close together who've got the virus. And unless we're going to just basically say everyone has to live on their own in isolation, the virus is able to spread on that basis. But the key point is we should not be shutting down life for everybody else to save not having to shut down the lives of those who are the most vulnerable. The Great Barrington Declaration is such an obvious, sensible way of dealing with this. And this idea that you, instead of locking up 67 million people, you ask, it's not mandatory, you ask and suggest to people who have vulnerable problems with the very obese, people with severe asthma, diabetes, treatment for cancer and the like, that those people shield along with, let's face it, millions of people in their old age. But it doesn't have to be everyone over 60 or everyone over 70. I say my parents are in their late 70s. They're just being very careful. They're not going to crowded places, but they're still going out. They go to the supermarket. They see family, but we don't hug each other. They know that my family, we're all out at work, so we keep back from them. We sit in a big room. We sit far away. We're doing what we can to be sensible and to be sane, but you don't have to lock away an entire population when you could actually just shield those who most need to be shielded. And bear in mind, even if you're in your mid-80s and you're a man and you've got underlying health conditions, even if you are the worst, highest category for dying of COVID, you've still got a 98% chance of surviving. So I would need to get this into perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned earlier about those who perhaps would quite like a full lockdown like the one that we had originally, because they quite like to not go to work, to be honest. And I think that was exemplified in the National Education Union's tweets. They've called
Please don't let me swear.
They've called for our schools to close again. Now, we know, Julia, if I can just quickly rattle off some of the facts that we know about that, we know that this disproportionately would impact upon society's most disadvantaged communities, with private school kids much more likely to receive online tuition, classes and support. And research revealed that during lockdown, 2.3 million children were getting only a couple of hours of lessons a week, while 2 million children received absolutely no education at all. I wonder what your message is, Julia, to the National Education Union.
A message that could actually be published and printed.
Yes, please.
I'll have to zip it on that one. Look, the National Education Union doesn't give two hoots about teachers, pupils, or education. It's a far left organisation promoting class warfare. Let's stop the pretense they're trying to do anything good for kids. I am incandescent with rage that schools were closed in the first place. I've always thought, even when I supported the lockdown, schools shouldn't close. The evidence was very clear. Again, everyone wanted to follow the science in the first lockdown, didn't they? When Chris Richards, Patrick Balance pointed out there was very little impact of children going to school, everyone decided they weren't going to follow the science anymore. They were going to follow their hearts. And their hearts told them schools were unsafe, even though they weren't. Which is crazy. And as we've seen, all the people who over the summer going, no, like the National Education Union, no, you can't reopen schools, everyone's going to die, the teachers are going to die. Actually, teachers catch it from other teachers in the staff room because they're not social distancing, not catching it from the pupils. And who knows where else they're not socially distancing as well. Teachers are at no higher risk than anyone else. And we know that pupils aren't at high risk. I would have had my daughter at school the whole way through the lockdown. I'm appalled that they could even suggest this, and the number of people who are backing it. And I don't think it's got anything to do with safety. I genuinely think they just want to foment, class warfare. They actually actively want to use children, the most disadvantaged children, from as tools in this. Because I'm telling you, my daughter, who goes to a private school, best money I've ever spent, by the way, as a comp girl, they had 6 hours of Zoom lessons every single day, and they had 98% attendance. She hasn't missed out on anything other than getting to play netball and hanging out with her mates. It's the poorest kids at the worst schools that were already being failed anyway, who are being failed yet again. Those kids still haven't caught up what they missed first time round. I'm still stunned that the schools actually closed for the half-term holiday. I think it's astounding that they didn't use that time to make up the extra schooling for the children who'd missed out. And I don't understand why most teachers didn't call for that. And I do think most teachers do a great job. God, it's not a job I'd want to do. And they do a great job. But there is, unfortunately, too big a minority of teachers who could not give two hoots about the kids they are supposed to care about.
Yeah. Now, if we can turn to another topic that you've been quite passionate about, BBC. Well, that's true. That's a good point, actually. That's a very good point. So BBC presenter Victoria Derbyshire said she'd no intention of sticking to the rule of 6 on Christmas Day, and actually that she was planning to have her usual table of 7 family members. She then, Julia, had to issue an apology, I assume because the BBC upper echelons of it had said, hang on a minute, you're going to have to retract that. What was your view on that?
Yeah. Well, I wrote an article for the Telegraph about that, saying, why retract it? It's talking sense. It is genuinely absurd that the government thinks that 6 people sitting around a table, although currently now, of course, under lockdown, and even under tier 3, would not be allowed. But 6 people sitting around on Christmas Day eating turkey and pulling crackers is perfectly safe. Everyone's going to be fine. Add a 7th person, add an aging parent. Wow. I mean, we're all going to die. I mean, the plague is just going to descend upon us. Patently absurd. I've interviewed a number of cabinet ministers who've said to me, like, we just need to use our common sense. And I said, well, what about when the law doesn't have common sense? Do we have to obey the law or use our common sense? They go, you have to use common sense and obey the law. I go, well, okay. So when the law is literally the opposite of common sense, I mean, telling people maybe don't have all of your relatives round, don't do all the aunts and uncles, separate into 2 groups, keep separate, and then don't meet each other on different days. Just keep to a smaller bubble of people, a smaller circle than you would normally have. Don't go to have all these big office parties. I get that. That makes sense. Of course it does. Certainly, when I see my parents, I make sure that we have been really careful the week beforehand. I just want to, this virus isn't a hoax, it's a real virus. Let's just be extra careful beforehand so we know we're giving ourselves the best chance of being safe. But these sort of rules on Christmas Day would have been absurd. And I'm telling you right now, whether we're in lockdown, tier 3, tier 2, tier 1, whatever is happening, on Christmas Day, those rules are going to be relaxed. And we all know they're going to be relaxed because the government won't have a law which upsets that many people. And you have pictures in the papers of grandmas, little old ladies on their own, unable to spend the day with their grandchildren and the like. But because millions upon millions of people will very sensibly break that law otherwise. Now, I'm not calling for anyone to break the law. I'm just telling you they're going to break the law. I've got no doubt at all about that. And having a law that millions of people break openly, as a lot will do, will make the government look pretty stupid. So they're going to change it for the day. But that just tells you how stupid the law is.
I mean, I've got 2 points on that. The first thought I had was I went back during the first lockdown. I went back home because my nana's youngest daughter had passed away, sadly. And we went back for the funeral. I went back for the funeral. And the whole family said, oh, Darren, keep away from your nana. She's 86 years old. So I thought, right, fair enough. I obviously won't go wearing a mask indoors and all the rest of it. Washing my hands, blah, blah, blah. And my nana said, you are absolutely not leaving this house until you have given me a cuddle. It is not, it is my choice. It is my decision. And I thought, you know what? Good for you, because you are not allowing, she's 86 years old. I mean, come on. And she is saying, you are not going to deny me of my agency during the last year, what will be the last years of her life.
This is the absolute key, is that the prolonging of life at all costs is not what the British people necessarily want, even for their own family members or even for themselves. My mum is 77. She's a former GP. She understands this stuff, and she's been very sensible. But she lives alone. And when I first went to visit her after we were allowed to actually finally travel around the country, I refused to hug her because I said I just couldn't live with myself. I'd be the only person she'd have that physical contact with. Since then, she's like, sod this. No, I'm hugging my grandchild and I'm hugging my daughter, and we'll all take sensible risks, and it's about the quality as well as the quantity of life, and that's where we get to people in care homes. I've got an aunt who's trapped in a very lovely care home. They've done a great job. They've kept COVID out, but really, it's an existence, not a life. Exactly. And I go to visit her, and I talk to her through the window, and I sneak in when I do a delivery, and I speak to her most days on the phone. And it's absolutely heartbreaking, and she feels like she's an inmate in prison, despite how lovely, and the staff are amazing, they're wonderful, but she just feels, and I'm sure millions of others, that just totally trapped. And the idea, she can talk on the phone. The idea of you've got tens and tens and tens of thousands of elderly people who couldn't possibly manage a phone call or FaceTime or Zoom or anything, even with help from the staff. They wouldn't understand what was going on, and they're not allowed to see their family members, and their family members can't see them. I mean, again, we're in a level of sort of torture territory here, where I just think that families need to be allowed to make their own decisions and decide what they value more.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder, though, with that said, with all of those people who are saying, actually, you will not deny me of my agency, I will make my own risk-based decisions. And at the same time, there are people like us, Julia, who quite like the police being funded, who quite like the rule of law, and would quite like to defend the police, and quite like it when you do it on your show, when I do it on my show, and all the rest of it. And that's evidenced by the number of emails and views, etc., etc. But so they feel naturally quite conflicted about breaking what are rules of law, the rule of law.
We have a greater, was it Greater Manchester or Midlands, I can't remember which one it was, a police commissioner say the other day that, yes, on Christmas Day, the police would be going in, breaking down doors, going into people's homes.
I know.
If they were having Christmas lunch with other family members. I mean, you think,
good luck, mate.
I mean, we're genuinely talking about living in sort of Soviet Union, Russia, or North Korea at this point. Look, I've got very, very good friends who are police officers who and they tell me, what the feeling is on the beat. They live outside London as well, and they, ordinary rank and file officers are with the general public on all of this stuff. This is the woke sort of PCCs and the chief constables who've had all their, their unconscious bias training and the like, who are talking about this stuff. This isn't the role of the police. We don't have armed police. We have policing by consent in this country, and that's done for a reason. And the police officers on the beat are very, very scared right now that we are at risk of throwing some of that trust and that consent away, and for nothing.
Now, Julia, I'm going to make a slight sort of about turn in this next question, but it strikes me that, and I was thinking about this when we heard that in Wales, sanitary products even that were viewed as non-essential items, and this was apparently a mistake, and it's now being corrected, but it comes at a time when actually women are viewed, I think, as non-essential. We're seeing sex segregated...
Women do what? I don't understand. Do we use that word anymore?
Well, quite, exactly. Sex segregated spaces and biological sex attacked like never before. Tampax posting tweets about people that menstruate and not women. We've seen announcements, of course, that the government won't accept self-ID, but this is coming at a time when the American president, a contender for the American presidency, Joe Biden, speaks of 8-year-old trans kids. Do you think it's time actually that feminists re-entered the battlefield? Because I do feel like they've taken a step back.
Oh, well, I thought we did. I think I'm always called a TERF. Was it a trans exclusionary radical
feminist? Yeah.
I mean, I spent half the time with the woke 25-year-olds telling me I'm not a feminist. Don't know quite why they think that. I'm not enough of a sister because I don't think women are, eternal victims. And then the rest of the time being called a radical feminist who apparently is a transphobe as well. The ownership of the word woman, I consider to be pretty basic stuff here. Sometimes I think that I'm just in a horrible dream. I really do. When we have things like, as you say, Tampax, referring to people who menstruate and the like, and we see this across lots of products aimed at women and lots of organisations and everyone trying to be. They think woke. It's not woke and it's not progressive. It's bloody offensive, is what it is. And I use the word bloody appropriately there, I suppose. We never, ever, ever in the trans debate ever hear the word man or men. We never hear those words replaced by people who, I never see, adverts for razors, for people who shave their faces. It's men, Gillette man, it's only when it's with women. And this is where I have become increasingly of the view that the trans activists, not people who are struggling with their identity, who are trying to live a quiet life and want to be treated, if a man wants to be treated as a woman or the other way around, not those people just trying to go about living their best life with lots of very big difficulties. I'm talking about the activists, the political activists, the ones who are online, who are sending rape threats and death threats to people like J.K. Rowling for speaking out about the safety of women and the like. These people hate women. It's not that they want to be women, they hate women. This is a misogynistic campaign against women. And when you talk about people who menstruate, For a start, a woman is not just someone who menstruates. We do more than bleed, by the way. We speak. We have feelings as well. We do jobs and everything. But when we pretend that these are things that people do and not just women, we sort of steal away a part of women's identity. We steal away a part of what is a woman and who we are. And the idea that women are nothing more than a figment of a man's imagination, something they might want to be on a Wednesday afternoon, and we are a state of mind rather than something that exists in a full sense, and we are born this way, we exist this way, and we cannot fundamentally be changed from being women. I think it's insane, and I think it's offensive, and I think it's also very, very dangerous. I am not just not a man. I am a woman. I have ovaries. I have a womb. I have a vagina. I have breasts. I menstruate. I will go through the menopause. I can have a baby. These are absolutely vital to the identity of being a woman. All of these things, even if one individual woman can't individually do some of those things, and to pretend that those things aren't integral to what a woman is, makes the word woman meaningless. And I care very strongly about words having meanings. It does matter because it means that ideas have meanings as well. And I think this is something that more women and men really need to stand up. And it's not just something silly and nonsense that's happening on Twitter. It's a very, very real thing. It's a very real thing when you take away the identity of women from women and girls, and you allow any man who says he's a woman on a Wednesday afternoon to enter our safe spaces and to pretend to be a woman. I'm not talking about people who quietly want to live their life as a woman and be treated with respect and kindness, as I would always do in that case. I'm talking about activists who hate women and who are a danger to women. And I really think we need to speak out more about it.
I completely agree. I mean, we hear time and time again. I remember last year during the zombie parliament when Boris Johnson had said humbug to a parliamentarian, and there were screams of Boris Johnson and the use of language.
There was fainting on the floor, wasn't there?
Oh, totally. And how we're debasing language. Yet the left, those on the extreme radical left, seem absolutely determined to render the term woman completely useless.
Well, it's the extreme radical left. I think a lot of the front bench of the Labour Party would sign up to this madness. Mm-hmm. And it needs to be rooted out. I mean, we really need to say, up with this, we will not put. How dare you? I don't vote for racists. I will not vote for anyone who runs a racist campaign or someone I believe to be racist. I also won't vote for somebody who I think doesn't care about the safety of women. If you are questioning whether or not women exist as something other than a figment of men's imagination, you ain't going to get my vote. And we need to tell our politicians that they've got to stand up to this. We had a front bencher until a while ago who was of the view, terrifyingly, that children are born without gender. I mean, I don't know, whether I imagined, when I see a baby with a penis, I'm just imagining the penis or not. I don't know, but that sort of insanity shouldn't be sort of just brushed over and laughed at. It should be seriously challenged. You are wrong. You're insane. What you're saying is dangerous. It's factually incorrect. It's scientifically and medically incorrect. And it has huge implications for women's safety.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of those that pander to this complete and utter nonsense that needs to be rebutted, you actually voted for Sadiq Khan in 2016, didn't you? And
yeah, I didn't like the campaign. Zach Goldsmith's campaign. I don't think Zach Goldsmith is a racist at all, but the campaign run by Tory Central Office, I think it was a nudge, wink, wink, Sadiq Khan, Muslim, wink, wink. I thought it was racist. I didn't like it. And I've known Sadiq Khan a long time as a political journalist. I'm not a big fan of green policies either. I thought, on balance, the right thing to do was to vote for Sadiq Khan. Yeah, how's that worked out for me?
Well, quite. I mean, he seems to be doing all he can to divide our nation and pander to those who simply don't wish us well, doesn't he? And I wonder what you make of everything that he's done over recent weeks. He definitely seems, one, he would be well up for the rendering the term woman useless activists, but also for the everything around unconscious bias training. Basically, I think, listen, Juliet, this is a fantastic country that enjoys, I think, brilliant race relations.
I think it's not a matter of opinion. Statistically, all the evidence over
shown,
the years,
exactly,
one of the least racist countries in the world.
Exactly. But I think we are at real risk of sort of widening that divide. Yeah. What precious little divide there actually is, yeah. We are at risk of widening that, because people are actually for the first time starting to think about things and starting to see people for the colour of their skin, and we shouldn't be doing that. I thought the raison d'etre, the whole idea of the equality movement was racial equality movement was to actually ensure that people were judged instead by the content of their character.
That's what Martin Luther King said. Martin Luther King wouldn't pass muster on unconscious bias training right now. He'd probably lose his job. He would be considered a racist by the so-called woke progressive left now, because he's saying that we shouldn't see colour. I was raised by absolutely non-racist parents. Close black friends. I au-paired for a black family. My first serious love was for 18 months at university was a black man. I suppose the entire time I was unconsciously biased against black people. I just didn't know it. This is the thing. One of the things I find so frustrating about Sadiq Khan, he will get in racial divisions at every opportunity. The other day he sent a tweet about that he would not support the extension of the congestion charge zone to the North and South Circular. An absurd idea anyway, but he wouldn't support it because it would affect BAME, Black and Asian ethnic minority businesses and people in East London. You think, sorry, what? So do Black and Asian people pay a higher congestion charge than white people in London? I mean, on what planet would colour come into that at all? And we had it even over COVID. You think, oh, we're not going to have culture wars over COVID. The ongoing claims that somehow it's the inability, the barriers standing in the way of Black and Asian people getting healthcare, apparently. The wonderful NHS that we've been clapping all this time, apparently horribly, horribly racist. Who knew? I didn't realise this about all my NHS, workers. I've been clapping all this time. The idea that this is a racist virus that is killing people, when we know actually it's about where people live. Large numbers of Asian and Black people live in urban areas, tend to be in lower economic and social classes for very obvious demographic reasons. Children of immigrants, it takes a few generations for this to change. Working in frontline, key worker, public sector jobs, more likely to come in contact with lots of people. All these things are really obvious. And people like Sadiq Khan, they know this. Sadiq's a really clever guy. He's a trained lawyer. There's no way he doesn't look at those statistics and see the same thing that you do and I do. But he'll still play it anyway. He'll still claim there is racism. He will throw it out at every occasion. And I don't understand what purpose that is serving. This is a country that has done its very best to be a non-racist. The idea that we are a nasty, horrible, racist country where every white person is born with privilege and that every Black or Asian person is born, with this massive, massive big millstone around their neck is patently untrue. I mean, and all of the education and employment and everything other statistics will tell you that that's not the case. And I don't know why people want to lie about that stuff, because it seems to me that celebrating the fact that we have the highest rate of mixed race marriage in this country would be something that we should want to do. Celebrating the fact that we have British Asians who are holding some of the highest offices of state, who haven't been promoted because of the colour of their skin, but because of their ability. I think it's really bizarre that of all the times in British history we could claim that this is a horrible, nasty, racist country, the evidence quite clearly before us is that it's not. Even by the way, when we had those very tragic first deaths of hospital consultants in the NHS from COVID, I think the first 6 doctors were all either Asian or Black, and this was apparently evidence of the terrible racism in our society. And I just thought, this is really strange. When we heard about the backgrounds of some of these, particularly were men, there were people who had arrived here as immigrants, either as children or in their early 20s, and had risen to become very successful, highly respected, well-paid consultants in one of the toughest professions in the NHS in this country. And I just thought, how on earth, if this is such a horrible racist country, have you got to that position other than the fact that you've been promoted on ability and you've arrived as an immigrant in this country and you've been able to achieve so much through your own hard work and ability, but you haven't been held back by this nasty racist society you've come to? And I don't understand how the people who think this is a horrible place to live can hold those two ideas in their heads at the same time and not see that they can't both be true.
Absolutely. I mean, I wish we were sort of a little bit more, poor France is obviously very unique in what's happened to it over weeks, months, years even. But the French are very resolute. Like, they just say, listen, these are our values. These are what this is what we believe in. Those values of enlightenment.
So impressive, Macron.
Yeah, absolutely. So impressive. And I just wish our politicians were a little bit more like that, just saying, no, actually, I'm not going to pander to those. It's a lot like, I sort of view it like, if you knew someone didn't have your best interests at heart and they offered you advice, you would perhaps just say, okay, well, thank you very much. But you wouldn't take the advice to heart. You wouldn't accept the advice and change your entire life and the way in which you operate. But if a mate said, well, hang on, Darren, I think you've got this wrong for X, Y, and Z, and you should probably make the following changes, I would be more likely to take it on board. I think you have to start viewing that much like a nation. And those who do not have your best interests at heart, who do want to convince people that it's a vehemently racist country or some backwater, they don't have the nation's best interests at heart, and we should simply ignore them.
Yeah, I mean, that said, I'm not pretending for a moment that I don't have, certainly, I'm a white middle class girl. Of course, I've got an easier life. I've got an easier life than you as a white working class lad. And I've got an easier life than many black and Asian people inside. I'm not pretending that's not the case. There's no doubt at all. There are racist landlords. Oh, sorry, the flat's already gone. And then the next white couple get it. And there are employers who don't employ or even bother interviewing people who've got, say, an African sounding or an Asian sounding name. And I've got no doubt at all that happens. But it's happening less and less and less and less. And it is on a much, much smaller scale than these people are pretending. And it is so socially unacceptable. It is so beyond the pale and awful. You can see this when we have football matches, when we had incidents of nearly always, by the way, something that happens abroad. England or a Premier League team playing a Champions League match, somewhere in Eastern Europe, and someone does monkey chants or throws a banana, and the absolute outrage from everybody across the board, across the political divide, every class, every colour, every tabloid newspaper, horrified by this. That tells you what the values of this country are.
Mm-hmm. Now, listen, that's frankly quite enough about Sadiq Khan and all that. So now, Julia, we've covered quite a lot of ground, and I'm very grateful to you for your time. But I wonder if, to end, you might discuss what you'd like to actually see moving forward from both the government, the media, and actually why people mustn't despair and advocate clamping down with these draconian measures that will actually soon, and as you said, the second lockdown will be the clincher, to bite even harder than they already have.
Gosh.
Yeah.
I'm going to really have to struggle here. Okay, let's stick together. That's my first argument. Let's stick together. Let's remember that we are all on the same side, and whether someone is pro-lockdown or anti-lockdown, let's remember that it's in all our interest to get out of this as quickly as possible and to deal with all the economic fallout from this together. I think also we need to remember how important the values that we hold in our hearts are, our belief in freedom of speech, in accountable government, in democracy, in our vote, having power. We need to remember that those things matter. They're not sort of intangible things. They have a real absolute effect. We saw that with Brexit, didn't we? We saw it with the last election. It absolutely does matter. And I think also fundamentally, let's remember how much we value our freedom. And, I don't have to go to the pub every evening to know I'd like to be able to go to the pub. I don't have to see, my parents to know that I'd like the right to be able to see them and to hug them. I don't have to sort of, think that, my daughter's school is the best school in the world to actually just want her to be able to go to school and see her friends. Our children being able to play in the park together, being able to just grab a coffee with a friend, being able to go to your workplace, being able to get on a plane to go on holiday. These things matter. They don't matter as much as each individual life keeping alive, but they do matter. And I think we need to remember, as these freedoms are snatched away from us, and I believe largely for not good reason, that we will remember that we want them back and that we will fight to have them back. And we must make sure that at the end of all of this, and we'll be through this at some point, probably not as soon as the government pretends, but at some point, that we will demand back every single last right and every single last freedom that we have had taken away from us, and we will demand it back, and we will insist on having it back, and we will exercise those freedoms for the rest of our lives, and we will never, ever let them be taken away again.
Beautifully put. JHB for PM, that's what I say.
I couldn't take the pay cut.
Anyway, thank you, mate.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. And don't be late for my show tomorrow morning.
I won't. I'll be on my best behaviour, I promise. I will. Anyway, thank you. Now, I'm sure after that, you'll all be absolutely desperate to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. We're over halfway to meeting our fundraising target. So please do, if you're in a position to do so, please do consider supporting the channel. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.